Hello and welcome to today's Middle East Report. In this programme today we'll be discussing the battle for truth and how the political tide is turning in Israel's favour in Scotland. Welcome to the programme. In this programme today we're talking about the battle for truth that is taking place regarding Israel in Scotland and how that tide is now turning in Israel's favour. And I'm joined today by Sammy Steen, who is the chairman of Glasgow Friends of Israel. Sammy, welcome back to the Middle East Report. It's about a year ago since you were last.
Thank you very much, Simon. It's a delight to be back and speak with you because a lot has happened since the last time I was here.
Absolutely.
And people need to know about it.
And what's really good is that Glasgow Friends of Israel have just celebrated their first anniversary. So congratulations to you.
Thank you.
And congratulations to everyone involved up in Glasgow, because I know you're all doing a great job.
Well, we didn't think we would survive a year. Certainly many other people didn't think we would survive a year. And in July we had our first birthday with regards to our street stall, which we have in Buchanan Street every Saturday. And we get many people coming by and coming back to speak to us about the truth regarding Israel and the Middle East.
Fantastic. And Sammy, for our viewers that, and maybe even for myself as well, I think you've got such an incredible Jewish heritage that you were born in Tel Aviv in the Mandate years, prior to the re-establishment of the State of Israel in 48. That you're Scottish and yet you're more Israeli than you probably are Scottish. So can you just share with us your unique Jewish heritage and the story of your family, because it is incredible.
When I'm on the stall I tell people that I was actually born a Palestinian, which surprises lots of people because they think Palestinians are only Arabs. In fact, Palestinians are people who lived in Palestine when it was Palestine. So I was born in 1946. And when I was 2 years old in 1948, I became an Israeli citizen. So I started off as a Palestinian, and when I tell people that, they get very puzzled about how that's possible. So I lived in Israel till I was about 10 years old. In 1957, my parents decided to come to Scotland, and I came with my parents, and I've been in Scotland ever since, except a period when I went back to Israel, and I did my military service in Israel for 5 years. But now I live in Scotland, my family's in Scotland, and I'm, I suppose, half Scottish and half Israeli.
Excellent, which is a great combination. I have to ask you, what are the unique challenges facing Israel up in Scotland, in particular Glasgow, in comparison to, say, different parts of the UK?
Well, Scotland, to some extent, has got its own political differences with regards to the country trying to be independent. And to some extent, that could be an advantage because Israel is a small country. Scotland is a small country. They've got a lot of things in common, and if we can bring some of these common things together, then I think Scotland and Israel can become closer together. So that's the good side. On the bad side, we have a very aggressive and vile organisation called the Scottish Palestinian Solidarity Campaign, who are out there on a regular basis basically demonising Israel and demonising the people of Israel and demonising Jewish people in general. And they, I think, pretend to be anti-Israel, but many of them, I believe, are anti-Semitic.
Absolutely, and we'll talk about them a bit more later in the programme. But like I said in the intro, Glasgow Friends of Israel is now 1 year old, and you're in your second year. Can you tell us the reasons why you established the organisation and the impact it's having on the streets of Glasgow, and also being able to communicate Israel's message of peace to the citizens and visitors of Glasgow?
Firstly, Glasgow Friends of Israel is one of a dozen groups in Scotland called the Friends of Israel, which have been started mainly by Nigel Goodrich, but we just happen to be the largest group in Scotland, and we are to some extent unique because most of the Jewish people in Scotland live in Glasgow. So we have a very balanced group between Jewish people and Christian people, and I think that's one of the strong points that we have. Most of the other groups in Scotland tend to be mainly Christian because there's no Jewish community where they are. And the advantage of having this type of non-denominational group is that when people come to the stall, they say things like, well, I expect you to be a supporter of Israel because you're Jewish. And I say, yeah, I'm Jewish, but Jean over there is not Jewish, and Thomas over there is not Jewish, and Andrew over there is not Jewish, and many of our members are not Jewish, so this is not a Jewish organization. This is an organization of people who have a heart for Israel and love Israel.
And also incredible commitment as well, to actually come out and give up a Saturday to set up your stall, talk to people in the streets, which is not easy, and then just to tell the truth about Israel's situation. So it's an incredible commitment, isn't it, made by you and all the other volunteers.
Well, you know how wonderful the weather is in Glasgow, so it's really quite pleasant to go out on a Saturday and speak to people in the street. But we are there both winter and summer, and over the past 15 months, there have only been about 2 or 3 Saturdays that we haven't been on the street, mainly due to the weather. Even if it's a particularly wet day, we would go out in the rain and we would stay for as long as it's possible to actually speak to people, because the objective is to speak to people in the street. If it's very wet, people do not stop and chat with you, so you have to make a decision. Do I wait for the weather to change and get better, or is it going to be really bad today and we should just shut up shop? So last Saturday, for example, it was a very wet day, but we were there in the street till after 1 o'clock. We spoke to loads of people, but then we decided to give up. But as you said, there is a large group of people that come to the stall, not necessarily every week, but we have a fairly strong group of over 20 to 30 people, and they all come when they can, for as long as they can. And that's quite good because people get a rotation, and people, the public comes back to the stall often to talk to us because they like what they hear, and they get to meet different people, which is also very, very good.
Fantastic. And also you are probably like Sussex Friends of Israel as well, through their counter demonstrations against the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign trying to ban, I think it was the Israeli SodaStream store. And
yes.
they stood there week after week after week, and they developed such a strong bond and friendship between them all that were able to do so much work in terms of advocating for Israel.
Well, we work closely with Sussex Friends of Israel and also the Northwest Friends of Israel. We share a lot of information, we share a lot on the Facebook page, and we try and help each other right across the UK. And when you work together, you get a much better chance of achieving your goal. We don't want to work in isolation. We want to work as much as possible with all the other groups and do what we can to help each other.
Absolutely. But as a Jewish person, Sammy, what does it mean to have such strong Christian support? But to have the Christians coming out, standing with you? And there would have been a period in time where that would have just seemed impossible. But thankfully today, that is now a reality.
It's one of the most heartwarming experiences you can have when you talk to a fellow member of the group who doesn't come at it from the same background as you do. Because what we're trying to show is Israel is not necessarily a Jewish interest. It's an interest for people who love the country, who love what's happening there, and who actually understand what's happening in the Middle East. And they want to tell people about it and talk about it. And they speak from the heart. And that's the difference between what we do and some of the other people on the other side, what they do.
No, I did attend the International Shalom Festival up in Edinburgh, where I saw you, which was great. But I have to talk about the incredible hostility. Now, I know about the BDS, I know about the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign, but I've got to honestly say that I have never experienced the vile and sadistic nature carried out by the Scottish Palestinian Solidarity Campaign, especially when I was coming up from the main train station and just walking up the road, and then we had to turn in. So before you actually approach the building, you saw a lot of Palestinian flags,
yes.
And then saw a heavy police presence, and then as you walked in, they were kind of shouting shame on you with stuff like, you have Palestinian blood on your tickets, shouting out Palestine will be free from the river to the sea, which effectively means genocide. But what experience have you had in dealing with the SPSC, the Scottish Palestinian Solidarity Campaign?
What I'd like to do is just talk about the Shalom Festival first.
Of course.
I think being in the venue and the concert, we couldn't hear the demonstrations outside. But let's not tell them that, because I don't want them to know that they weren't having any effect on the festival. So as far as they're concerned, they were making this enormous noise, but we were having a great time inside, and we didn't hear anything that they were doing or shouting, which is great. But when you walk by, these are vile, vitriolic, aggressive, arrogant people who do absolutely no good for the Palestinians. Now, you look at these people standing in the street, shouting and screaming through megaphones. What are they doing for the Palestinians when they do that? Absolutely nothing. They're doing nothing to help these people who need as much help as possible. We, on the other hand, when we stand at our stall, we tell people that we support both Israelis and Palestinians, and we would like to see a peace settlement for both people. Now, that is actually taking a positive step to help the Palestinians. They are doing absolutely nothing for Palestinians. They're just pretending to like Palestinians. And the question is, what would these guys do if there was peace tomorrow? What would McNapier do if there was peace tomorrow? He'd be out of a job. He'd have nothing to do. So he doesn't want the conflict to end. He wants to extend the conflict. He wants to make it worse so that he can get up in the morning and hate Israelis and Israel, because that is his job. That is what he does. And he's got absolutely no interest in seeing any peace. And he never mentions peace. He only mentions hate and anti-Israel rhetoric.
On Israel.
I believe that the SPAC will be watching this video, and they think by you giving them a 5-minute video run, they're getting publicity. But in fact, they are getting publicity, but it's very bad publicity. And I can tell you, I was inside the building and I did not feel besieged. I did not feel worried at all about what they were saying, because I was there to celebrate culture while they were celebrating hate. And that was the big difference between what we were trying to do and what they were trying to do. And most of the things they say, we know are lies. They're moronic, these people. They don't know the history. They don't know what's going on. And they just come out with these stories one after the other, and most of the people just follow them. They have no idea what they're talking about. They get paid a few pounds to stand in the street and shout, and that's why they're there. They're not there because they actually believe in helping the Palestinians. And it's true, the Palestinians have got issues in Gaza. There's no occupation in Gaza. People say, well, what about the occupation in Gaza? There's not one Israeli soldier in Gaza. Israel gave back Gaza in 2005, exactly. And it's been free of Israelis ever since then. And Hamas are the people that govern Gaza. Hamas are the people that kill Palestinians. Hamas are the people that make Palestinians become shields for them when there's any type of conflict with Israel. Hamas are the ones who are doing the Palestinians harm. And when they say free Gaza, my view is free Gaza from Hamas, because they're the people that they have to get out of.
Absolutely. I mean, we also heard some disgusting chants. For example, one of the chants which I found absolutely disgusting was that your tickets have Palestinian blood on it. But the other statement that they were shouting was Palestine will be free from the river to the sea. Now, isn't that effectively calling for genocide? And what's the difference between the Scottish Palestinian Solidarity Campaign's position and that of Hamas, when they're actually effectively calling for genocide and the destruction of the Jewish state? Because if we look at that statement and we see that statement through, where is 5-6 million Israelis supposed to go if you want to say that all of Palestine will encompass all of Israel, what is now Israel? And effectively that is nothing but intent towards aggravated incitement to genocide.
I think the problem is these guys don't actually know what they're talking about. So if they knew what they were saying, they would be saying, yes, let's destroy Israel and hand over all of the land from the river to the sea to the Palestinians. Now, that is never going to happen. Even if there is hopefully a two-state solution one day for the Palestinians, there's no way that Israel is going to disappear. So they're already asking for something that is completely impossible. Not only is it impossible, but they don't actually know what they're talking about. Because when I speak to these people, which I do sometimes, and I say to them, from the river to the sea, well, which sea are you talking about? And they look at me with this puzzlement. Are you talking about the Sea of Galilee? I don't think so. Are you talking about the Red Sea? I'm not sure. Are you talking about the Dead Sea? Oh, I don't know about the Dead Sea. Are you talking about the Mediterranean Sea? They have absolutely no idea which sea they're talking about. And they don't understand the meaning of that phrase, from the river to the sea, which, as you say, is a cry to basically get rid of Israel as a country and destroy all the people that live there.
Also, why is it that the SPC and their English counterpart, the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign, are so silent when it comes to the treatment of Palestinians living in Lebanon, those who are faced like second-class citizens in Jordan, and that's where the real if you want to talk about apartheid, that's where the real apartheid is. And also the ethnic cleansing also by Palestinians in Iraq as well, and other places in the Middle East where their fellow brothers completely distrust them and they are regarded, if worse than second-class citizens. So why are we not seeing protests outside other Arab embassies if they truly cared about the plight of the Palestinians and the people, rather than just being an organisation that just hates Israel for the sake of it?
Well, the answer to your question is the question. The reason they're not doing anything about it is because they don't really care about the Palestinians. If they cared about the Palestinians, they will demonstrate against those regimes that do Palestinians most harm, and that is not Israel. So these people are basically anti-Semitic, anti-Israel. They are not pro-Palestinian. They have never been pro-Palestinian. If you look at them, most of them are Scottish. They're not even Palestinians themselves. These are people who've got nothing better to do with the time, and they use their anti-Semitic feelings to stand and shout against Israel. They do not care about the Palestinians. They say nothing about the Palestinians and do nothing for the Palestinians to make them feel better.
And I think the kind of contrast was the police that had to stand outside the venue, and the contrast between and the spirit in which the Shalom Festival was carried out, and it was a real mixture of Jews and Christians and others, with a combination of Israeli Jewish culture as well as Israeli Arab culture combined to make quite an interesting day, as it were. But clearly there's a sheer contrast between the two sides, isn't there?
Well, firstly, the police in Scotland are great. We have a relationship with them also in Glasgow, and they support what we do every Saturday in Buchanan Street, and they were terrific at the Shalom Festival. And as you say, they couldn't believe the contrast between what was happening inside and what was happening outside. And Michael McCann said he wishes us every success, and the event was incredibly successful. Hundreds of people turned up at the Shalom Festival. During the day, we had people coming and going to look at the exhibits and the demonstrations and the films and the chats. And in the evening, we had this most remarkable concert with Israeli artists. And the final of which was this group called Ana Aref, who have a combination of both Israeli and Arab music. And they actually showed people how these two cultures can come together. And that's what we're trying to do in Scotland over the next few years.
Yeah. Hopefully we'll have a little bit of an extract from Ana RF, and this was taken on some amateur video, so hopefully we'll have that in a minute for you. But also I think it's important that what you've been able to do with Glasgow Friends of Israel, and what our good friend Nigel Goodrich has been able to achieve through many of these Friends of Israel groups being established up in Scotland is to take the narrative back regarding Israel, and knowing that before we saw that Scotland was very hostile towards Israel, but we're seeing that the climate is changing, and we're seeing a real change in Israel's favour, aren't we, in Scotland, with so many pro-active Israel groups now being established and being set up.
I think people have the wrong impression about Scotland. There is a minority of people in Scotland who support the pro-Palestinian cause. And, you know, they've got every right to do that. But you know what they say, empty vessels make the loudest noise. So in essence, these people are very few, but they're incredibly loud, incredibly arrogant. And we know that over time we'll get more and more people supporting our cause and fewer people supporting their cause, because they can see the difference between our way of doing things and their way of doing things. We are peaceful, they're aggressive. We are pleasant, they're horrific. And it's a much nicer way to be the way we do things.
Okay. So let's have a look at a little bit of this amateur video of Ana RF, which is an Israeli band that also have a very Arabic flair to their music. Don't see that. If you watch closely in that video, you'll see Ismail Khalid, who is Israel's first Bedouin diplomat, wearing his traditional Bedouin garments and dancing around with an Israeli flag. I don't think you'll see that very often, so it's worth watching that just for that. I have to ask you in terms of the different approach you take regarding the Palestinians themselves, and the difference between you and the SPSC is that you reached out to the Palestinian Youth Orchestra that visited Glasgow in the name of peace and goodwill to counter the BDS and to show the contrast. Can you tell us the story behind it?
Sure. I mean, we found out that the Palestinian Youth Orchestra was visiting Scotland. They were doing a tour of Scotland, and we discovered they were having a free concert at the City Chambers in Glasgow before they started their tour. So we were invited by the City Council to speak to these young people, and we wanted to welcome them to Glasgow because we are the Glasgow Friends of Israel, and we wanted these young people to know that we were really keen for them to know that we support both Israelis and Palestinians, and that we are a friendly city to them, and we are a friendly organization to them. And so we went to the concert, we spoke to the young people, we heard all about their stories. They had a reception later on, and we spent quite a long time talking to them. Now you compare that to the reception that the SPSC were giving Israeli artists when they came to Scotland. It's a shame for Scotland. I mean, the authorities who try and help us as much as they can, there's very little they can do about this kind of demonstration, and I think they will be trying harder. But the contrast between what we do and what they do is night and day, and we love people, they hate people.
Absolutely. And you don't organise counter protests or demonstrations outside, say, for example, the Palestinian Youth Orchestra. You didn't organise an anti-Palestinian demonstration outside one of the Glasgow halls where they're playing. You didn't say showing the Palestinian flag covered in blood and saying they're all terrorists or what have you, or go home Palestinians. There was none of that, was there?
No. We want them to come to Scotland. We want them to see what a wonderful place Scotland can be. Now, one of the people I spoke to said that they heard that we would have a counter demo at the Shalom Festival, and we're all ready for that. But that's not what we do. Why would we want to spend our time standing opposite these horrific people, looking in their eyes and shouting at them? We're much better off being inside and enjoying ourselves. So we have no interest whatsoever in counter-demoing against these people. It's a complete waste of time. It does absolutely no good, and why would we want to do that?
Absolutely. I have to talk about something which is very current, which is also very important, because one of the leading members of the Scottish Parliament put out, was it a motion in support of the Celtic fans waving a Palestinian flag at a very crucial Champions League game between Celtic Football Club and that of Beersheva in Israel,
yes.
which is an Israeli football team. Can you share what happened there?
I find it really quite difficult to understand why Celtic fans support the Palestinian cause. Celtic and the Jewish community in Glasgow go back a long way. We've been very close in the past, but recently a lot of Celtic fans have become pro-Palestinian, and I can't quite see what politics has got to do with football. They should really be kept apart, but for some reason they've taken up this cause, and they're standing in Celtic Park in Parkhead shouting these horrific slogans against Israel. Now, there was a demonstration at the game last week, and they all brought out Palestinian flags. And clearly that is in breach of UEFA rules. They should not be allowed to have political statements at sporting events. Now, this MSP is actually quite a young, new MSP. His name is Ross Greer. He is a Green, he's with the Scottish Greens, and he's presented a motion saying that the Parliament should be supporting the Palestinian flags in Celtic Park. So here's a lawmaker in the Scottish Parliament encouraging people to break the law in football. That just doesn't make sense to me. Why would he want to do that? The guys can support the Palestinians, but they don't have to do it at football matches.
No, absolutely. I completely agree with you. Do you think there will be any backlash against him or any problems? Because he's in a position of responsibility as being a lawmaker in the Scottish Parliament.
Well, there are quite a few politicians in the Scottish Parliament that we know are anti-Semitic. I'm not saying Ross Greer is anti-Semitic because he's quite a new guy, and I've actually seen him at the hustings. I don't believe he's anti-Semitic, but I think he's mistaken when it comes to his anti-Israel rhetoric. He's never been there. He doesn't really know what he's talking about, and it would be great if we can get him out to Israel to see what it's like before he makes these statements in the future.
Absolutely. And as of the recording of this program, I believe that Celtic are playing Hapoel Beersheva in the Negev, and one thing that Celtic and the players and also the fans going to watch the game can receive a very warm welcome in Israel. Do you think that on their visit to Israel that they will be impressed by what they see, but also the warmth of Israeli hospitality?
There was a suggestion on our Facebook page that if these people are so committed to the Palestinian cause, perhaps they should take the Palestinian flags with them and be brave enough to display them in Beersheba. But I don't think there'll be too many of those. And I think most of the Celtic fans will get an incredibly warm welcome in Israel, because Israel does not want to mix sport and politics. We're there to play football, and they want to watch the game, and they don't want any politics introduced into that game.
Absolutely. And I think I can call you officially, Sammy, kind of an Israeli Scot.
Yes.
So can you share with us the rich cultural diversity and also the rich Israeli culture that goes back thousands of years that Israel has to offer?
Well, people need to remember that Jewish people have lived in what was the Holy Land for centuries. They've never left the Holy Land, and a lot of the culture comes from there. When Jewish people pray on a daily basis, they say, they mention Jerusalem on a regular basis. Jerusalem is in our Bible, for example. Jerusalem is not mentioned in the Quran, for example. So although Muslims say that Jerusalem is very important to them, it's never mentioned in the Quran at all. It's mentioned over and over and over again in the Old Testament and the prayers that Jewish people carry out every day. So from a cultural point of view, everybody that lives in Israel, many people have come from lots of different countries, from 120 different countries. They've all assimilated in Israel, and they've all got a mixture of culture. And this is what you saw with Ana Aref. They were playing a mixture of cultures, both Israeli and Arab, and that's how the people tend to live in Israel.
Absolutely. And also some people really think that that Israel is so diverse. I mean, if you just look at the Jewish population that make up modern Israel, I mean, many of them come from, say, Yemen, others come from Argentina, others from Europe, others from the Middle East, from Iran, from Iraq, huge population from Iraq and other places in the Arab world, plus also many from South Africa. So it gives a real cultural diversity to the place. And one experience, I had some very close Israeli friends. She was once serving in the IDF, so she invited me home when I was living in Tel Aviv to attend a seder meal for Pesach, for Passover. And her family from Romanian, so they had a traditional Jewish Romanian Passover, which was very different from other Passovers. So how much does that add to the cultural melting pot that is Israel, because it's so diverse?
It's unique, Simon. It's unique. What happens in Israel doesn't happen anywhere else in the world, because people have come to Israel from all the countries. Now, they do this because of the right of return. Israel has a right of return for Jews from all over the world. And sometimes at the stall, people say to me, well, why should Israel allow Jews to come back to Israel and have a right of return? These people don't know there are over 30 countries in the world that have a right of return. They just think Israel is the only one. That includes France, Finland, Germany, Greece, Ireland has got a right of return, India's got a right of return. So it's not unique to Israel. It's just that Israel welcomes its Jewish people from all over the world. And one day, if there is a Palestinian state, then I expect the Palestinians will also have a right of return to Palestine.
Yeah, but sadly, part of that negotiations is, particularly with Fatah and the PLO, is that part of the negotiations is that they want a so-called return of the Palestinians to be returning to Israel proper, something like 800,000 coming into Israel. But they make no mention of the fact that over 700,000 Jewish refugees from Arab lands were forced from their homes. So when you look at it, it's a moral equivalent, isn't it? That sadly so many Arabs were forced. Well, they weren't actually forced from home, because many of their Arab leaders were saying, leave your homes during Israel's war of independence, leave your home and flee your homes, and next day you'll be able to come back when our armies come in and completely destroy the Jewish communities and destroy Israel, then you can have your homes back. But sadly, those who stayed prospered, but those who left obviously are suffering today, and also they're still in a refugee situation because the Arabs failed to take responsibility, unlike Israel, who looks after the Arab Israeli refugees, the Arab Jewish refugees who came to Israel.
Well, they don't mention it because it doesn't suit their narrative.
Absolutely.
They just want to make people believe that this was a one-way process. Now, the Palestinians are the only refugees in the world that have been refugees for 60 years. Why are they still called refugees? Most of the people that live in these camps were not born in Palestine. They're not really Palestinians. They just happen to be from families that used to live in Palestine. Now look at what happened in the India partition. 14.5 million people moved for safety between India and Pakistan. None of them were refugees anymore. They were all settled in the countries to which they were accepted. And the same thing should have happened with the Palestinians. They should have been settled in Jordan or Syria or Lebanon, which is where they live just now. They haven't been settled because the Arab countries don't want to do that. They want to use the refugees as a political point, and it's the Palestinians that are suffering because of that.
Absolutely. And I have to tell you, we're down to the last 5 minutes or so of the programme, Sammy. Now, you're organising a conference organised for the 25th of September, where one of the themes of the conference is the approaching 100th anniversary of the signing of the Balfour Declaration. Can you tell us what your conference entails, and particularly for our viewers living in Scotland, what they can expect if they would like to attend?
Well, firstly, it's good to know this is our second annual conference. We had one last year, and we managed to last long enough to have a second conference. It's going to be called Balfour and Beyond because, as you said, next year is going to be the centenary of the Balfour Declaration. It's also going to be the 50th anniversary of the Six-Day War. And so we're inviting as many people as possible to come to our conference, which will be on the 25th of September. And it's going to be about the story of the establishment of the State of Israel, all the way back from the Balfour Declaration through the years to where we are now, and hopefully looking forward to when we can have peace in the region for both peoples. And that's what it's going to be about. So we have a variety of speakers that will be speaking there. There's going to be a workshop, a couple of workshops. There's going to be a Q&A session to give people an opportunity to find out more about what's happening in Israel. And we're hoping to get many people coming to this event. It's a Sunday. It's going to be a whole day event, which will start about 10:30 and finish about 4 o'clock. The other thing we're doing is we recognize Sunday is a day that many Christian people go to church. So we're having a Sunday service for them, which will be on before the conference starts. And one of our group is a reverend, a minister, and he will take the service. After the service, we will start the conference proper, and we hope to have a most wonderful day for all the people that come.
I'm very impressed with that. That's very impressive, and that's a good thing to do. So thank you for doing that, Sammy, because so many Christians like to attend a lot of these pro-Israel events, but also feel that they're missing out because they're not having their Sunday service. So the fact that there is a Sunday service before the conference, I think is a great idea, and hope other groups and organisations take that up, because that's very kind and very considerate.
Yeah, we recognise that we are a multi-denominational group, and therefore we have to cater for all the people in the group, and that's one way of doing it.
And I've got to say, we're down to the last 4 minutes of the programme, and for our viewers watching this programme who, if you live up in Scotland or near Glasgow and you would like to get involved in Israel and you haven't done so, how can they get involved, Sam?
The best thing to do is to come to the stall. We're there every Saturday in Buchanan Street. People who know Glasgow, we're just between the Apple Store and Starbucks, just at St Vincent Street. and we welcome people all the time. We want them to come and speak to us, let them see what we're doing, meet some of our members, and if there's anything at all they can do and want to do, we would welcome them into the group. Absolutely,
and we put your email up on screen, so if you want to get in touch
with
Sammy directly, you can. I think what you're doing is great, Sammy, and it's great that you are giving Israel a voice in the streets of Glasgow. You're taking those streets back. You're changing the narrative that surrounds Israel to a more positive one and an actual truth one, and you're actually winning this battle of truth. Where would you like to see Glasgow Friends of Israel, say, from 5 years from now?
Well, I'd like it to grow. and I'd like it to be even more active than it is just now. So as well as the stall, we run speaker events every month or so, and we've had 4 this year, and now we've stopped for the Shalom Festival and for the conference. But in December and November, we plan to have a couple of more speakers coming to Glasgow to speak to the community, which when I say community, I don't mean the Jewish community, I mean the Glasgow community. And we would like to be able to see that grow and have more people join us and have more events, and for people to know the truth about what's happening in Israel and to understand that we are not a pro-Israel group, we are a pro-peace group. And what we're trying to do is help both the Israelis and the Palestinians achieve their future.
And also have members of the Jewish community in Glasgow been encouraged by what you've done and by taking to the streets of Glasgow to explain Israel's position?
I think people were very worried when we first started saying that we would go on the street, and we were quite afraid. And even our own children, when they spoke to Vicky and I, said, oh, please be careful that nothing happens to you. We're very afraid for you to be out on the street. But I can tell you, we don't have any major issues with the people in Glasgow. Glasgow is known to be very, very friendly, and the people are very friendly. And most people that come to us are incredibly friendly. And that's what we intend to keep doing.
Excellent. Sammy, I just want to thank you so much for being my guest on today's Middle East Report, and thank you for coming to share, particularly about Glasgow Friends of Israel's first anniversary. So congratulations, and may you go from strength to strength in campaigning for Israel and proclaiming the truth of Israel and regaining the narrative about Israel, but more importantly, telling ordinary people about the incredible cultural heritage that Israel, and explaining the truth regarding Israel's situation.
Well, it's been a pleasure, Simon, and if this program can help us get more members and for more people to know about the work we're doing, it's been absolutely wonderful.
Pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Safe journey back.